I'm Margie Nichols. I'm a psychologist, a sex therapist, and I'm the executive director of IPG Counseling, the Institute for Personal Growth. At IPG, we counsel gender variant kids and their parents.
I'm Courtney Zender. I'm the new social media assistant at IPG, and I also work full-time with LGBTQ and gender variant youth.
So this video is inspired by the Sunday Times magazine cover story for August 12th, which is called Boy Girl, or What's Wrong with a Boy Who Wears a Dress.
So we wanted to make this video sort of in response to help educate people. Really, hopefully this video is accessible for anybody, but we certainly have parents of gender variant children, educators of gender variant children, and gender variant children themselves in mind when making this video.
Right. So we're going to start by throwing some definitions at you. The first thing we want to define is biological sex. When we talk about biological sex, we're talking about chromosomes, right? XX and XY chromosomes and all kinds of other variations. We're also talking about hormones, genitals, other body differences, and also brain differences, which science is just beginning to learn about. The second definition we want to throw at you is gender identity. Gender identity is the internal sense that somebody has of whether they are male or female.
Next one we want to throw at you is gender expression. So that's sort of what somebody does with their gender identity, how they sort of present it to the world, how it manifests outwardly. So that can be clothing, grooming, like haircuts or shaving, tone of voice, mannerisms, movements, things like that. And the final word we have, or the term we have for you, is gender roles, and that's sort of what society expects of either biological males or biological females, sort of what jobs you're supposed to have, how your romantic relationships are supposed to look, what your family's supposed to look like, things like that. Right. So when we're talking about these terms, usually it sort of all breaks down in society's ways of speaking in sort of this binary here. So that your biological sex, like your chromosomes, your genitals, your gender identity, your gender expression, your gender roles will either all sort of map nicely down this side as a complete female, or sort of all map nicely down on this side as a complete male. And we sort of want to disrupt that.
I mean, that's what we're taught, but the reality is a lot more complicated. The reality looks a lot more like this, right? So on this side are the people who may map entirely as female, and this side as male, but there's a huge middle area in here. So to begin with, for example, there's a lot more than just XX or XY chromosomes. There's a lot more that's in the middle. Hormones, physical characteristics, the brain, all of those things have a lot of variations. So many, for example, that the Olympic Committee has fought for years just to figure out something that we think should be simple, how to tell the difference between a male and a female athlete. It's not at all obvious because the biology is pretty complicated. Gender identity also exists along this spectrum, so where some people consider themselves female and feel comfortable with that, some male, but lots are in between. Same with gender expression. The only thing that's really still pretty rigid are gender roles, and that's because society determines gender roles, and the gender roles that this society has determined are pretty rigid, pretty inflexible, and sometimes arbitrary. So, for example, you probably didn't know that 100 years ago pink was considered a boy color. Now it's considered a girl color.
And we're, in this video, sort of particularly concerned with this rigidness as it relates to children, and sort of talking about these children that exist in that middle realm, in that more purpley colored section of the continuum. And we want to talk about these children in three sort of different ways, like three different categories of gender variance, because one person's gender variant child is not exactly like another person's gender variant child. It manifests in different ways. So there's like three tiers that we'll talk about. The first tier is what we call gender non-conforming. So that's pretty mild gender variance. Something like a biological boy assigned male at birth wants to play with Barbies, or like wants to go get his nails done with Big Sis, something like that. Like a behavior or a like that is considered not appropriate for your gender by society, but this child still probably views themselves as male. They're not upset about the gender they were assigned at birth. They believe it's right for them. They still see themselves as a boy, but they just want to play with dolls, or they just want to, play around in a skirt one day. It's sort of the first tier of gender variance. The second tier we want to talk about is what we call gender fluid. So that's a child that maybe is assigned male at birth, they're biological male, and they are comfortable either fusing together masculine and feminine traits or dancing around and sort of alternating between masculine or feminine traits. So that's like a child that maybe wants assigned male at birth that wants to like rock a buzz cut and a skirt at the same time. Or on Monday they're totally happy to like look like a boy stereotypically, but on Tuesday they're like putting on makeup and playing in high heels. And that both those roles, both those ways of presenting feel totally natural to the child. This child, for example, the one we're talking about, the biological boy, might be okay with their gender identity being male as well. They might see themselves that way, or they might see themselves maybe as a third sort of gender, as an in-between male and female sort of gender, depending on the child. Then you've got third tier gender variance, and that's what we would call a trans or a transgender child, a child who's assigned a certain sex at birth, their biological sex, and that child thinks it's the wrong sex for them. They truly believe that they are, if we're talking about an assigned male child, they truly believe that they're a woman, and they truly believe that that's the right identity for them, and they want to live their life that way. The last little piece about these three tiers, we really want to stress that what we're talking about here is gender, and that sexual orientation, who you're attracted to, who you want to date, is a different piece of the puzzle. It's a different thing. Just to make sure that we're not confusing those when we're talking about this.
Right. So what's happening now in the culture that's different? Because there've always been children that are gender variant, gender non-conforming, gender fluid. So what's different now is that this is the first generation of parents that doesn't want to force their kid to behave in a way that feels unnatural to the kid. The first generation of parents that actually sees that gender roles can be more flexible and are somewhat arbitrary and wants to allow their kids to express themselves. Now, that's wonderful, except it's particularly difficult if your little boy is if your child is a biological male. If you think about it, girls get a lot more leeway, at least until adolescence. More than 50% of adult women say that they were tomboys as children, and tomboys often get praised, admired, encouraged. It's really the little boy that wants to wear a dress that's got a lot of trouble. And that's the reason, because of this sort of special societal stigma about little boys who are gender variant, that's the reason why in shrinks offices you see a lot more gender variant little boys than little girls. For a long time, the mental health profession made things much worse. For a long time, psychiatrists told parents that what they needed to do with a gender variant child was force that child to conform to the gender role, and they were frightened into believing that terrible things would happen if they didn't do that. At IPG, we never took this point of view, and now the profession is changing, and more professional societies and therapists are seeing that this is a harmful thing to do, and some professional societies even call this kind of therapy reparative therapy, and they consider it unethical.
Yeah, basically research is showing right now that sort of the worst thing you could do for your child if they're gender variant is to force them to live a life that's inauthentic for them, is to force them to sort of change who they really are. So in the second part of this video, we're going to talk to mostly parents about how you can really engage with your child in a way that embraces their true gender identity and celebrates it, so that your child can be happy and so that you can have a meaningful and happy relationship with your child.
Okay, so thanks for watching, and look for part 2.